Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It is a gloomy, drizzly day here in suburban Chicago. We're getting that kind of rain that's like a very light mist, which at any given moment doesn't feel like it's raining, but over time your clothes get a little damp and your glasses accumulate a little bit of moisture. And so I took the effort this morning of bringing an umbrella with me, so I thought I might as well have the umbrella up even though it's not really raining very hard. But I noticed that it does mean I have a change in the sound profile of the podcast because I've got a shield over my head reflecting the sound back down onto the microphone. So I'll be interested to know from you listeners whether the sound is qualitatively different today and whether that makes a difference in what it sounds like. So let me know. The best way to let me know is over at Board Game Geek and Guild 3269, where we have a guild for the Pick Up and Deliver podcast. Head over there and let me know what you think of the sound on this episode. So I had a fun game this weekend, and in the next Shooting from the Hip episode, whenever that occurs, I will be talking about Perseverance, the Castaway Chronicles, the next big, super rich, deep exploration game from our friends at Mindclash Games. I'm very excited for that one. I did get to play it this weekend, and I want to talk about it certainly. But my plan today is not to talk about that game, in part because I don't really want to talk about it for 15 minutes, although I probably could. But instead, because it did inspire me to talk about a different thing, a different element. And that is the theme. Between that game and Dwellings of Eldervale, which I played on Sunday again, I was inspired to talk about games where I think the theme provides an interesting approach and a useful explanation for the mechanisms that you're using. Now, I've always thought Mindclash is perhaps the best small publisher out there for developing theme and mechanism hand in hand in a way that the things go together, that the narrative explanation that's attached to the theme becomes part of how you understand the mechanisms. And I feel like for games that are heavy in complexity and depth, it really goes a long way if the mechanisms explain the rules complexities. And if the theme explains the rules complexities. So if you're going to have weird mechanisms, it's very helpful if the narrative explanation that's offered helps the players understand why the theme works, why the mechanisms work the way they do. You know, the classic example I know I've mentioned on the podcast before would be for Dungeon Lords. The dragon isn't allowed in the worker cafeteria. And in the game, they offer the narrative explanation, well, dragons are messy eaters and like to start food fights, which is silly, but also a rich narrative element that helps you remember this rules quirk, which probably has a mechanical basis in necessity, that's important for some reason, mechanically. And so they offer you this rule to attach in your brain to that mechanism so that you can remember it. So what I wanted to do today was talk about the games that I have from Mindclash, the company that published Perseverance, the Castaway Chronicles, and connect that to, and basically I want to talk about each one and what I think is interesting about its mechanical setup, why I think it works really well the way it does. And then I'm going to offer you a second game that I think is thematically connected and also interesting. Now, I will say, I did not think this out ahead of time. So if I pause or stumble or make some dumb comments, it's because I did not plan this out. I came up with this idea and I got the vague notion of it in my head, and then I said, yeah, that's what our episode will be about. I don't even know what I'm going to call this yet. Thematic Siblings. That works. All right, so we're going to go through the different games from Mindclash Games and explore the thematic siblings among those games. So chronologically, the first game Mindclash published is the very heavy worker placement action selection game Tricarion. Now in Tricarion, you have a variety of workers. They are being placed on the board in different places where they can execute their work well. some of the mechanisms are really effective. If you have a manager character, they have a little extra power, and when you use them at the theater, they get you extra money. If you have an engineer, they help you set up your tricks more efficiently. There are also some things in the game that I think functionally just don't make sense. The bonus structure for when your tricks get performed is confusing and doesn't make a lot of sense. The idea is if you set your tricks up on Thursday, which has mechanical advantage because you get to go first, you have a point negative whenever those tricks are performed. But narratively in the game, the players are performing on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday and appearing in one another's shows. It's like Brendan, the great Brendan does 3 tricks in his show, and maybe Jenny does 1 trick in the show. And if Jenny had set her stuff up on Thursday, she still gets that penalty, even though my trick is being performed on the most popular night, let's say Sunday. So that part's a little confusing narratively, but mechanically it makes a lot of sense. But for the most part, there are lots of things mechanically in Tricarion that work really well because of the narrative that has been created. So what's another game that involves interesting mechanical choices that tie heavily into theme, that is about wizards and magic? I'm going to say Alchemists. Alchemists is a game from CGE. I don't know who the designer is, apologies. And it's one of the first app-driven games I'm aware of. It doesn't have to be app-driven, but generally is. The way the game works, you have a wizard with a bunch of apprentices, and you are gathering ingredients and mixing potions and experimenting with those potions to see how effective they are at giving you bonuses and whatnot. And then you're selling those potions to people who come to town. The places where I think it's similar is that you have to sort of plan ahead when you're going to go, and you have these different apprentices who do work for you. And then the outcome of the work that you've done often results in a variety of different points. It also there's a whole lot of going on. There's a whole lot of different places that you could send your workers to do work. And so in that way, it feels like a good thematic and complexity match for Tricarion. All right, the second game from Mindclash is Anachrony. Anachrony is a game I've covered heavily on the podcast before, so I won't spend too much time on it now, except to say that Anachrony has a novel loan mechanism that does a really great job of making loans feel like time travel. In other words, you can get a loan from yourself for a particular item, and then you have to pay that item back to yourself later. And then to incentivize using that mechanism, they actually give you points for when you pay it back. So you borrow something from yourself, amp up your engine using that thing you borrowed, and then when your engine is producing more, so more efficiently, you can pay yourself back and get points at the same time. It works out really nice, and I think it's the heart of the game, and I really like it. I haven't tried the Fractures of Time expansion yet, which I'm told makes the game really incredible, so I'm excited to try that at some point soon. But Anachrony, what is the parallel game or the similar game I would offer as an interesting thematic connection that has cool mechanistic ties? I'm going to say Loop Inc. Now, this is a game that nobody has. I think it was published by Tasty Minstrel Games, who have since gone out of business. And it was really only the one print run. It did not take off in terms of popularity. It's a game from Scott Alms. And in this game, you are a low-level employee at a time travel tourism business. So your boss has set up these time traveling tours to different places in time where people can see different exciting events. And because your boss is cheap, instead of having you just lead the sessions, what he has you do is he has you go on your trip and then come back to the day before your trip. And the next day when you're leading the one trip, you also have to lead a second trip with that same ship. And then you do that again a third time. And all along the way, you're assembling your ship to make it use different parts so that you can safely go to these different areas. And of course, the parts are very limited and everybody's competing for them. So like Anachrony, where you're competing for the different placement spaces, you are doing that here as well. You're competing for the different parts. Like Anachrony, you also have to worry about how you're going to affect your own self in the future. And you have to worry about these sort of paradoxes that can emerge, which can really screw up your game. The art is from Kwanchai Moria. In fact, that's the place where I learned the name of the artist, Kwanchai Moria. And Loop Inc. is a pretty cutthroat game, much like Calico or Azul, where you could just be trying to do the thing you want to do and accidentally just wreck someone's game. And from that perspective, it's super fun. It's not a game I've played a lot recently because my wife doesn't like it, but even just talking about it here really makes me want to bust it out again. That's Loop Inc. from designer Scott Alms and I believe Tasty Minstrel Games. All right, next up on the Mindclash catalog is Cerebria. Now, Cerebria is a game in which you play 2 players or 4 players. You can play 3 also, but 2 teams play competing emotional mindsets, either gloom or bliss, and you compete for control of a mind. As you play, you amplify the power of the spirits that you're moving around the mind by spending resources to build up your powers, and the powers then give you more and more control as you manipulate the areas around the board to try to win control of different spaces. The game is really fun, incredibly competitive, and sort of balances on a knife edge. There's a lot of really interesting moments where you are trying to come out just slightly ahead of the other person in order to pull off that victory. I really like it. It's one of my favorites. That's Cerebria from Mindclash Games. Now, what is the game that would mimic this? Well, this one's going to be a go explore it. There's a recent game that came out. I haven't gotten to play it yet, but it's called Voices in My Head. This is a new game that is, again, about sort of competing memories and competing personalities inside this person, trying to manage how they act and what they do. I believe that... No, I don't even remember the publisher. It just came out. I saw it at the game store. I've heard a couple of reviews saying positive things, but I haven't gotten a chance to look at it yet. But a lot of really interesting stuff going on there. Take a look. Voices in My Head as a thematic replicator to Cerebria. And finally, even though I've only played it once, Perseverance, The Castaway Chronicles is an interesting game about being stranded on an island and trying to deal with dinosaurs who are causing all sorts of trouble. Of course, in the game, you are trying to solve this puzzle of where to place things and how to control things. And there's an amusing complexity at work in the game. I would say a nice parallel to that would be Gods Love Dinosaurs. Gods Love Dinosaurs is an interesting game in which you play gods manipulating groups of animals to try to raise up different levels of prey that the dinosaurs can eat. As the game goes along, you're trying to get as many dinosaurs on the board as you can because that's how you score victory points. But to do that, you have to manage the populations of all these other animals in order to sort of feed the dinosaurs. So a really interesting game, a fun little puzzle, and definitely worth a play if you get a chance. Well, that is my quick and dirty survey of the games created and published by Mindclash Games and the way that their themes are reflected in other similar games. I'm curious, did you have other suggestions for games and how they would fit in these themes? Do you have suggestions for other publishers with whom I should do this kind of activity? I'd be keen to hear what you thought of this episode in general, because this feels like a fruitful theme that I could use to cultivate more episodes. So if this is well received, I may do this again. Alternately, if you didn't like it, you could let me know that too. There's 3 ways to let me know that most efficiently. The first is to head to Board Game Geek and go to Guild 3269 and post a thread there. That would be the preferred method because then other pick up and deliver fans can participate in the conversation. Secondly, you could send me a direct message on Board Game Geek. My username is Wombat929, easy to remember. And then finally, you can send me an email, Brendan@Rattlebox Games. Any one of those things will reach me and I'll get back to you if I can. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.